Now, before we jump into building applications, modules, and handlers, let's first take a look at the HTTP context class, because this is something you'll end up using in most of those extensibility point implementations. So the context class, as I mentioned, is created uniquely with respect to each request that comes in. So you'll have a distinct instance of this class for each request that comes in. And keep in mind, ASP.NET could be processing many requests concurrently. It's a multi-threaded environment, and it's pulling threads from the thread pool and dispatching requests onto endpoints. And these are all happening concurrently so that we don't have to serialize requests from multiple clients. So what we're going to have is many different instances of this HTTP context class, one for each request, and it's going to be affiliated with a particular thread, in fact, a request thread. And what's interesting about this class is it stores all the request-specific data that you might need to know. That's where you have reference to the request and response objects. In fact, as you've probably seen, the page class that we've been working with has access to request and response, but it turns out that those are really just pass-throughs onto the context object. So the context object is the ultimate holder of these request relative resources. So that's where we'll go reaching for them. It also stores links to all the relevant classes for you. So the application, the session, pretty much anything you'd want to do or inspect with respect to the request is going to be there. And it's passed as a parameter to a bunch of methods, the most notable of which is the process request method of the IHttp handler interface. Since that's the request to actually process a request, that's the method to process a request, you're going to need the context to do it. Now, what exactly is inside of this context object? Well, if you just go poking around, here's a short list of what you'll find. The first thing of interest is there's a static property called current. And this is interesting because what it actually does is let you retrieve the current HTTP context object relative to the thread that you're on. It turns out the context object is stored in the equivalent of thread local storage in .NET. So that you can always reach up into your current thread and find the context object. And the way you do that is by accessing the static current property. And I'll show you an example of that in just a second. The other thing you can access is the application object. And this is actually the application state bag, something you probably won't use too much in ASP.NET, as we'll see later. But it is there, and it's accessible using the application property. If you want to actually grab the HTTP application object, the instance of the global ASIX guy, there's a property called application instance, which gives you access to that. There's the session object, which we're all familiar with, I'm sure. The request and the response objects, that's where you might manipulate cookies or look at the query string, among other things, or just write to the response. The user, this is a good one to know about. The context has access to the user, which is a reference to the iPrincipal interface defining who is currently accessing who has made this request if they've been authenticated. If they haven't been authenticated, that will just mark it as anonymous. It's got a reference to the handler. So once the endpoint has actually been established and constructed, you'll be able to access it through the context object. This is the endpoint. The items collection, this is interesting. We'll take a look at later as well. This is just a state bag, name value pairs, that you can put things into and then pull them out later during the request processing. So you might find that useful as you're building modules, for example, as we'll see in a few minutes. Server gives you access to the server utility class, and the error object is an exception that might have occurred. Okay, so let me just show you a short example of using the current object in HTTP context. So I'm going to go back to our sample environment here. And let's go ahead and create a brand new application. And what I thought I'd show you is just an example of creating a class definition that uses the HTTP context, how it's possible to use the context from pretty much anywhere. So let's just call this pipeline demos. And I'm going to go ahead and add a class definition here. And we'll invoke a method on this class from within our page is the goal. So one of the interesting things about the context class is that you can access it anywhere as long as you're on the request thread. So let's just call this helper. And we'll say, yes, please go ahead and add that to the app code folder. And let's put this in a namespace, as we always should. And public class helper is fine. In fact, I'm going to make this a static class because it's only going to have static methods. And I'm going to bring in a reference to, oh, I've already got it, system.web, good. And let's just write a public static function void write to response. So we're just going to write something to the response. And inside of here, I can just say HTTP context.current. So there's the static current property. And then I can grab it and just say response. Notice I have access to all these things that we looked at on the slide there. .write. So I'm going to do something kind of silly here and just write out a hi from the helper class. But you can probably imagine other things you might do here. You might, go look at the query strings. You might look at cookies. You might do anything else that would be useful in the context of building a class. And the interesting thing about it is we don't have to pass a parameter into this function. We can just assume that the class is going to be used in the context of a web request. And if that's the case, you can always access the context via this static current property. So let's go ahead and try using this class. Let's just go call it from within our page, which we know is going to be executing on a request thread. So I should be able to say ps.helper.write to response. And let's go ahead and try running that. And that should be all we see in the helper in the result because I didn't have any content in my page. Okay, so you can use the current object. And again, the context class is your key to anything related to the request. You can go access the request, the response, the session, etc., and do whatever makes sense for you.